Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's workshop on climate action and sustainability blockchain use cases. We will give it a few more minutes to wait for all the participants to join. Thank you so much. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, wherever you are joining us from. Let me welcome you on behalf of INATBA and you both, partners of this workshop. I believe we have a raised hand from no more. Okay, that's fine. We would like to welcome you to today's workshop, on blockchain use cases as they relate to climate action and sustainability. This workshop is co-organized in partnership with the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum and INATBA's governmental advisory body, their work stream on climate action and the UN SDG goals, and the social impact and sustainability working group. At the beginning, I would like to say just that the intention of this workshop is to discuss the importance of blockchain as it might relate to climate action and sustainability and the level of this importance. At the beginning, I would like to go through a few housekeeping rules. So this workshop is going to take approximately 90 minutes. We will see how it goes and if we use the whole length of it. Please, if you want to ask any question, and we very much encourage you to ask question and post comments during this workshop. We intend this to be an interactive workshop. Please use the Q&A functionality to post question. You can ask a question either with your name or anonymously. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand, and my colleague from UBOF will give you the chance to speak. If you want to post any sort of comment or feedback, you can do so via the chat function. And you can also use the chat to provide any sort of feedback on the questions that will be asked or the presentations that will be taking place at the beginning. This workshop has two parts. At the beginning, we will have some introductory remarks and presentations. And in the second part, we want to run a series of poll questions and a series of open questions for discussion. So we very much encourage you to use or answer the poll questions as they will be launched in the second part of the workshop. I will also have each of the question on the screen, so you will see when there's time to answer each and relevant question. The important point is also that this workshop is being recorded. Please let us know if you don't wish to be recorded, or if you have an issue with that. It's important to say that it's being recorded only what is being said and presented on the screen by the presenters and the moderator or the speakers. So any written questions don't appear in the recording. This recording will be published on the website of UWolf, and it will be shared via their social media platforms. It will be also available via INATBA's website. So without any further delay, we will see if we have more people joining as we go on. But I would like to give the floor for the introductory remarks to Jörg Bolden, who is the co-chair of the Social Impact and Sustainability Working Group at INATBA. He's also the board member of INATBA, and he comes from the company iPoint Systems, where he is the co-founder and the current board member. Jörg, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Hello, I hope you can clearly understand me. Well, welcome.
Yes,
everybody here. I think we at INATBA in the organization, in the group here, trying really to identifying what we can do with technology and how we can improve technology in different groups and different streams. And one of the group, like Bar explained here, is the Social Impact and Sustainability Working Group, where I'm together with Mariana leading these groups, and where we're really trying to identify projects and approaches what helps developing a more social and SDG aligned ecosystem in the world here. One of the biggest part what we did in the last year is really looking into over 300 different startups and companies. How are they developing, and how is blockchain, every of the business model is aligned. There's a social impact of the blockchain stream into the SDGs. And this was quite interesting in seeing the first time that there's a deep link, a really deep link between social impact and sustainability. And nearly every of these startups was one of the major point and decision point that they're aligning their strategy either to energy, climate, other criterias of an SDG related impact here, sustainability impact. And this is the reason why we then linked these group together in a common group. As we all know, technology is not everything. A lot of these changes and what we need to do here, also driven by the European Commission with the Green Deal, is much more. The mindset needs to be adopted, the thinking needs to be adopted, and we need to understand how technology itself could help us in changing people's direction, understanding, and also how they're working together. The co-cooperation, co-competition business model, sharing economy, and others. I think it's one of the drivers what we see here, and one of the biggest issues itself. Yeah, and if you look now in the different areas where we're also building, maybe blockchain 100. This was one of this is a blockchain for goods. And they are also analyzing a lot of these drivers and a lot of these impacts in the different systems here, and trying to identify groups what helps driving the system forward into a better understanding of the impact of the product and the comparison of industries, comparison of companies and organization itself, and we can do better things in the future here. Itself, it's not an easy task. As we all know, interoperability and financing is quite a big challenge for all these organizations, the right use cases and getting the right money, the right cash flow to build and scale their business models independently where they are sitting. And like always, in the IT area, there's a lot of organizations, startups sitting in the area of US who are driving these SDG related issues. We see quite an interesting approach in getting a bigger community into a discussion here, and how can we do these things together better, faster, and with a better impact on the total system. Typically, these organizations, most of them stay really small. They don't reach the scalability because the use cases are not driven with enough efficiency and not presented in the way they should be. I think hopefully today we will have a clear understanding here where things could be better, and also the interoperability between the systems. I mean, this is easy to create a company today. You can easily set up an organization with all the cloud computing, business as a service, application as a service models and stuff like this behind. But how do we reach enough drive that we create a better impact for the people, planet, and for sure also for the profit itself? Because if companies don't make profits, they will not stay alive. So hopefully, I think today we will get quite some interesting discussions here, and we will see how it moves forward. For sure, if to people who don't know INATBA, I would like to talk a little bit about the organization itself, if there's an understanding what we do and how do we structuring the groups, the people, the organization, and the roadmaps in the teams here and the cross-functional teams. So if there's some open questions here, would love to discuss this too. You also can clearly push me a note either by LinkedIn or here in the INATBA organization. So we are really open and happy to involve everybody in the organization here to drive and help us pushing these challenging time, pushing everything forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jörg. I would like to also give the floor now to our second presenter or speaker, Mrs. Anka Bogdana Russo, who leads the strategic partnerships, policy and advocacy at CLabs, to give us a general overview of the blockchain space in climate action and sustainability. Anka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bara, and everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're based. Like Bara said, I lead strategic partnership and most directly the public sector partnerships at CLabs, working on the Celo blockchain. The Celo blockchain is an open, decentralized proof of stake blockchain that has been carbon negative from day zero, which is one of the areas of extreme pride for me. But I think there is a lot more that we can do in that respect. The vision both at CLabs, which is one of the main contributor to the Celo blockchain, and at the Celo Foundation, is that in order to create the conditions of prosperity for everyone, we need a healthy environment, financial inclusion, and connectivity through innovative technologies. And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about today. Happy to answer any questions. And I am going to go through the sometimes awkward part of sharing my screen and figuring out how that works. 1 second. Okay. Okay. Bara, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let me see if is it full screen now? Does it work?
It's still loading, or we can see white screen right now. It looks like you shifted the window to the left. Is it possible that you shifted it somewhere?
No, mine shows.
Okay, we can see only blank white screen, but before you went into the,
okay,
we can see this. We can see
okay,
that. Yes.
So then full screen doesn't work. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you for having me once again. And just to pick up from what was mentioned before, I think one of the big questions is why blockchain? And it's one of the questions that I'm sure other people in the industry get a lot, but I definitely get a lot when I start talking about blockchain for climate action, where it's very difficult for the general public sometimes to move past the headlines around the energy intensive usage of some of the proof of work networks. And it's obviously a much easier narrative to sell newspapers, but it doesn't do justice to the ability of blockchain to bring a lot of value into this space. So from my perspective and the perspective of those who we work with is why blockchain? We're looking at a couple of things right now around the transparency that is needed in, for example, the voluntary carbon markets. There's been quite a bit of the conversation around how carbon markets and offsetting can equal greenwashing, because it's very hard to track the quality of the carbon credits. It's very hard to understand where they're coming from and are they actually retired. And that brings us obviously to traceability and the immutability that ledgers and blockchain has, that brings trust to this type of transactions and the ability to know for sure that you're following the entire journey, so to say, of a carbon credit. For me, it's also about decentralized governance. It was mentioned before about how a lot of the companies that are active in the blockchain and and climate space tend to stay very small, and it's sometimes really hard to scale. And the truth is, when we are dealing with such large imperative issues like climate change or poverty, financial inclusion, others, the ability to coordinate across borders is really important. And we have to look very clearly at how do we empower the communities who are part of, who are living where some of our very important natural resources are physically located, to take care of those resources. And we have a recent example with Climate DAO, which was created in response to the opening of the Congolese government of protected areas to potential drilling. And that is a capability for tokenization. Again, what it does is the ability to align incentives. We tend to talk about about economic activity and impact on climate in the language of externalities. And the better we are able to align the right incentives for economic activity with the impact on climate by tokenizing natural resources, the better we move from externalities to actually being able to talk about money and value that is being backed by natural resources. And then last but not least, a lot of this requires transactions and transaction capabilities. And this is where blockchain, to the point where we are, is the fastest, cheapest cross-border international peer-to-peer platform to be able to empower these transactions. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is a little bit around the use cases that blockchain enables in climate action. And they are, as per the instructions that Bara and Tonya presented me with, aligned on a scale of, it would be nice to have blockchain, but it's not absolutely necessary to have blockchain to be able to facilitate this use case, to blockchain makes quite a significant difference, to it is really impossible to think of other technology at this point other than blockchain to be able to catalyze these use cases. One of the most vehiculated use cases around climate action for blockchain is always traceability of supply chains or value chains. Now, I think this is a really important and easy one to understand for a lot of people, because the ability to look at the origin of goods and making sure that We are sort of reducing the length of the supply chain as much as possible. And so relying on local communities and locally produced goods, and that they're produced in a climate-friendly way, empowered or safeguards, is important. However, to be quite frank, a lot of this doesn't always necessitate blockchain. There are other ways to do it. There's a lot of sort of centralized databases, AI that can help with a lot of this. And so blockchain facilitates some of this. It definitely brings a plus to the trust of the traceability because of the immutability of the database, but it is not a sort of make it or break it, at least in my perspective. And I'm happy to hear opinions to the contrary in this use case. We're also seeing a growth of carbon sequestration platforms who are utilizing blockchain again to as verification, as certification that a certain percent of carbon has been sequestrated through different types of new technologies, whether it's, I think in swamp, and I forget the name of the plants that are really great at bringing more carbon from the atmosphere. There's another very interesting project that looks at how salt can absorb more carbon from the atmosphere and keep it there. And again, while the certification part is interesting, it does not automatically require blockchain for it. I understand why some of the companies have gone for it because it's been a very generous Web3 funding atmosphere up until recently. And it does bring some of that trust element to it, but it's not necessary. Another one just very interesting to me, and I've come across it very recently, is sort of gamification of sort of digitally adoption endangered species or areas of endangered forest. Now, a lot of this is being done through NFTs and paying with tokens online to be able to create whole ecosystems with the funds then generated through the gaming platform going into actual projects on the ground. Again, I think this is a great way to educate people. It has proven to be a very sticky way for people to get involved in climate, especially teenagers. Does it absolutely need blockchain for it? I don't think so. Again, happy to debate that. Now, I think we're getting to one of the big current questions in climate, which is voluntary carbon markets. This are currently considered to be one of the main ways in which both retail users and institutional investors are offsetting their activity and the carbon that's being generated. It's also been quite recent, and I think Vera, one of the big registries, has now public consultation about how to integrate blockchain and blockchain-based carbon offsets in its registry. There have been very serious conversations around how transparent these markets are, but also how easy they are to access, both as a retail user, how much control and visibility do you have of what's happening, and an investor even more so. One of the things that you see right now in carbon markets, it's a seller's market. And you don't have enough generation of good quality assets that people can buy that are transparent and they come from reputable sources to know that it's not simply greenwashing, or that the life cycle, for example, of the reforestation that they're paying for is actually insured, as opposed to being planted year after year in areas that are not sustainable for that type of tree or other plants. So I think this is especially with the ability to verify the quality of carbon credits, to trace them, their entire life cycle, to make sure they are indeed retired, and monitor what is going on. The blockchain can make a substantial impact, even if it is to some extent just to bring more quality assets to the market and bring back a lot of the trust that has been lost in this area. Another one that I think is very interesting, and I think it's particularly relevant right now in Europe, as well as in other places, is the peer-to-peer energy markets, right? Energy, once generated, is very difficult, costly to store, even if you can do that. And you have segments of the market that are wasting energy at a certain price where other parts of the market could really use it. And that happens even at a household level. And so the ability to transparently and easily trade energy is one of the places where I think there's a lot of optimization potential for blockchain to use, both in being able to do the disintermediated matching as well as trusted transactions from peer to peer. And then last but not least, I think there are a number of use cases that are fundamental that really we couldn't have thought about bringing them to fruition without blockchain. And one of the biggest threats to climate right now is the rapid decline in biodiversity, right? In the past 40 years, about 35 to 40% of all species have disappeared. And this includes both sort of plants and insects and animals, and it may not feel that losing, I don't know, 50 types of flies is a bad thing, but in the context of biodiversity and the way that nature works, that is quite impactful. And that is actually, I would say, the most urgent threat to life as we know it right now. Now, one of the things that blockchain obviously lends itself very well is tokenization. And the ability to tokenize natural assets. And by assets, it can not only, it doesn't have to mean only land or trees, but it can mean a species of fish, a species of birds, to be able to protect them and drive funding into protecting them and aligning incentives, I think is one of the most relevant ways that blockchain can make a difference. Imagine being able to, as a company, hold on your balance sheet tokenized forests or a portion of the Amazon as a tokenized forest on your balance sheet, especially if you are, say, Starbucks, who buys a impressive amount of their coffee in Brazil, and being able to therefore be able to say, we're doing good for the planet while also ensuring that the bioclimate that has created the national conditions for the Brazilian coffee to grow and be, have the standard that we need to purchase and sell to all of our customers is maintained. Second of all, and I've talked previously before around climate DAOs, the ability to organize cross borders and not necessarily need to wait for another Paris Accord or Kyoto Accord, right? There are a lot of people who are very interested in doing something, whether it's putting small amounts of money in the retail tokenized natural assets market, or organizing, recycling drives that have a very hard time coordinating. But with DAOs, we have seen quite a bit of uptake in coordination across borders, cross ages, to be able to drive action from the ground up in a way that ultimately ends up putting pressures both on companies and governments to do their part. Last but not least, refi. So regenerative finance, by which I mean, again, the ability to introduce in the financial system quality green assets, quality tokenization of natural assets, and show that they are as valuable, if not more valuable, than most any other type of financial instruments that we have derived and created more derivatives on top of and bundled. And by doing that, very clearly showing the value, or rather assigning very clear value and financial value to the assets that we fundamentally depend on for our lives. A few of the projects that I am familiar with, I will start by saying that a lot of these are an integral part of the Celo ecosystem. They don't only work with Celo. I think there's a number of them that work with other chains, from Ethereum to Ripple to Stellar to others. They've just been easier for me to find because I know them and they work. They're part of our ecosystem. And again, they run the range from innovative tokenization solution and carbon offsetting to gamifying, adoption of endangered animals, to platforms that help sequestering carbon. And I will share this with Bar Antonia, and they're, feel free to also reach out if you have questions, but I'll share the presentation and the links to it. Now, one of the big question is, great, there's a lot of potential. Clearly, we haven't achieved it. We're early on. Yes, the technology is also early on, but what are the main challenges for blockchain to achieve its potential? Now, first and foremost, I think we're talking about interoperability. This is a wider blockchain ecosystem issue that it's increasingly starting to be tackled. If you issue assets on one chain and you can't bridge it to another, it creates silos, and silos are never a good basis for growth, for sharing ideas, and so on. We also need to be very clear and talking about our own energy consumption and efficiencies. Of course, it's very easy to get attracted by saying, Bitcoin or Ethereum, energy consumption is not nearly as high as the minting of physical cash for the UK in year 2010. I'm making this up, but just by reputing that the energy consumption isn't as big and incendiary as some people like to portray it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? And obviously we've seen Ethereum take a big step in that direction with the recent merge. But I think it's very important for us to think very clearly, how do we address that? And how do we build publicly a constructing narrative about how we're thinking about it? Third, I think we're still very early on. We still need to see quality assets on chain. I think it's very easy to talk about how important or how easy it is to buy or sell digital assets on chain. You really need to have very good quality ones to be able to bring the level of institutional investment and buy-in that is needed to make a change. And it was recently, it was previously mentioned, there's, we're not seeing scale, and that is true. I think right now we're still looking at a lot of focus on retail activity for carbon credit assets on chain and other type of climate assets on chain. And we need to be very deliberate about appealing to institutional investors, right? The investment banks who need to offset their activity, who need to be able to show that the companies that they invest in have a certain amount of quality assets they're holding on their balance sheet. And for that, you need to be very deliberate and very picky in what type of assets can be built on chain. I think we're done looking at technical building blocks, and I will say, as somebody who comes from the international development space to this, not from the computer science space, one of the big questions that I have is, what are the technical building blocks that we are right now missing to enable the current carbon registries, the current companies that are in the Web2 space to take a step into the Web3 and to easily build on-chain. And then last but not least, and this is another reason why we haven't seen as much institutional investment into this on assets on chain, is the regulatory frameworks. We have to, as public sector and in general, maybe as industry association, really understand what are the needs for regulatory clarity, and how to talk to regulators, both about the impact that blockchain can have in this space, the digital assets can have in this space, and what an enabling regulatory framework looks like. Because if we're looking at institutional investors who are looking to comply with all types of standards, they will need to know that the regulator recognizes their work and their investment in this space. Last but not least, I wanted to briefly introduce you to the Climate Collective, which is an expanding coalition of companies working together to tackle climate action. I think their website is climatecollective.org. It was incubated in sort of the Celo ecosystem, but what it does is really, it works to give grants, and it's in no way restricted to the Celo ecosystem. It works with a number of companies that have been incubated in other blockchain ecosystems, and they're working to be a convener of conversation in the space and how to attract Web3 companies to do more work and quality work in this space. And with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Anka, for the presentation and the wonderful food for thought. We have a raised hand from Muhammad Khalid. You are able to speak. You can ask the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Muhammad.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question in my mind regarding blockchain implications. So first of all, it is obvious that we can use blockchain for the compliance of all the available rules, for instance, GDPR and SDGs, etc. My question is, what you see about blockchain implication towards patient empowerment? For instance, I am a patient, I am residing in EU, so I have my own data. I just wanted to develop a story for this question is, for instance, I'm going to a hospital and I am having my thorough checkup, and the hospital is basically taking care all of my data, and they are going to give me a consent form for the data usage, and I blindly giving them my consent on a paper or on a, you can say, e-form, and I don't know who is going to use my data, who is going to hold my data, and what are the consequences of this data usage, etc. So my question is, how you see the future of data with respect to data empowerments with the patients, and how blockchain can mitigate all those issues in this regard? Thank you so very much.
That's very crucial question, I have to say, that relates to privacy and identity. Indeed, I'm not sure we will be able to answer that here when it comes to climate action and sustainability. I would ask if any of the speakers want to respond, but if not, I know that INATBA's identity working group is actually working on this topic together with the privacy working group. We also had an event back in July in Brussels, which focused actually on how much data are you willing to share with governments, with other private institutions, and so on. And that's really an ongoing debate, but it very much relates also to an ongoing work on digital identity when it comes to wallets, digital wallets, and giving more power to individuals to decide what data they want to share and holding their data. So I am not sure if any other speaker wants to reply to that, but it is indeed a question that would relate very much to the privacy and identity space.
But generally speaking, you're right. I'm obviously I'm following your point, but the point is, if you know about blockchain's implication in case A, then you are obviously, being a researcher, well aware about case B, and data provenance and data governance and all those stuffs are the hot cakes like in this time. That is why I popped up. Maybe this speaker can elaborate on it. Anyways, thank you so much. I'm here and I shall wait for any explanation about this question.
Thank you so much. I think none of the speakers want to respond at this point, but we can, of course, as we go through the other questions, maybe relate to that and how we see the future of the data in this space, in the climate action, and using blockchain when it comes to climate action and sustainability. And allowing to our data to be used in that space.
All right, thank you so much.
No problem at all. And we have another question, Anka, probably to you: how blockchain can help to bring transparency in e-waste sector? Would you know how to answer that question?
I guess it depends what e-waste means. I mean, I think there is quite a bit of work that's being done in recycling, right? As sort of in the normal waste sector, so to speak, where I think there's a number of use cases that I've seen. One mostly around tokenization and incentivizing people to recycle, right? I mean, and I think this is one of those other cases where, do you really need blockchain for it? I don't know, because sort of rewards for recycling or per item recycled or for quantity recycled are one of the ways that people have been incentivized to do it for a long time. What blockchain can bring here, again, is more traceability and visibility into the entire, I think, value chain, right? Is this quantity of plastic has been picked up, it has been sent for recycling, the person receives its token or their money, and then, then you can obviously set what can happen with that token. Can it be used for people to offset their carbon footprint? But then on the other hand, you can track that the recycling has happened, right? There's a verification and a certification of that. It can be that you're making sure that when a company says that something is being built with recycled plastic or recycled other type of material, there is a certification that, this bottle was recycled 3 times and it came through this facility, and this percentage of recycled plastic or paper is part of this good. And again, I think that's where it can bring I think it brings ease. And honestly, because we have been at this for a long time without a lot of transparency, I think it brings back some of the trust of the end user that this is actually happening.
Thank you so much for the reply. We actually have a few more questions in the Q&A, and I also welcome Jörg to answer any of them if he wants to. So the next question is, in terms of interoperability, which are the development platforms adopted or validated at EU level that are giving us that are given to us the higher level of adoption. Would any of the speakers know, or anyone from the audience who comes from the public sector who could recommend or answer this question? If not,
I can venture. Look, I don't think the EU validates different blockchain platforms per se. Right? It's not the job of the EU to validate a technology necessarily. If you're looking at platforms that are widely used, I think without limiting yourself to one platform, you want to look at EVM compatible ones. So sort of the Ethereum family, so to speak, because that's sort of an adopted ecosystem and an adopted standard where whether you build on Ethereum per se or other fully EVM compatible chains, there are a number of secure and continuously advancing bridges between EVM chains. And so with every chain that you that's EVM compatible, you increase the capacity and the reach of the ecosystem. Another way of looking at it is going after chains that make a very deliberate effort in the carbon offsetting and the climate space, that are positioning themselves as hubs for this type of project. Because, and then I'm obviously going to make a plug for Celo, there are others, because what you see where you have this concentration of focus on one topic is that you will see more like-minded developers and projects that constitute building blocks for each other, right? So in some ecosystems that happens with remittances, in some ecosystems that happens with sort of commercial bank wholesale settlements. And so those are the two ways that I would think about it without sort of giving necessarily a recommendation of one chain or another.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We actually have several more questions. I will maybe pick one now, and then if we have time at the end, we can answer more. This one relates to the financial sector. I would like to ask how the current EU crypto regulations, such as MiCA, are trying to address climate concerns. I'm interested to hear what speakers see coming up on this topic and how effective these measures would be. Would you have an opinion on that?
I have some thoughts. I also don't need to be the only one who answers this. So to be fair, I think there's been in the process of adoption of MiCA a big push. There's actually from my perspective, a concerning push at some point around banning proof of work, which I don't think is the most constructive way of approaching this, right? There was a very clear pattern, I think, last year around sort of conversation around the high energy usage of Ethereum and Bitcoin at the time, and not allowing the trading of that in Europe, which first I don't think it would be constructive, and then also possible to some extent to control. I don't, and I haven't looked at MiCA in a while, if the memory serves me right. It depends on how, so I think digital assets and tokenization of carbon credits may or may not be something that MiCA touches, depending on whether they're cataloged as financial instruments. They would fall under MiFID. But I'm also not a lawyer, so I think the conversation would have to, would have to,
I understand. Thank you so much for the reply, and I would actually encourage the participants to use the chat function to answer this question if they actually have knowledge of this, so that we can share with everyone, and we can get some information on that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Anka, also for answering these questions. I suggest we start with the second part of the workshop, and then we will see if at the end we will answer the rest of the questions. As said, we will have a series of poll questions. Some of the questions are open questions. And at the beginning, we would just like to ask you a few questions that are sort of helping us to understand where you're coming from and what sectors. So these are just at the beginning. So may I ask you to please answer the first question. Okay, I'm giving it a few more seconds. Tonya, could you please share the results of the poll question? Okay, while we're waiting, I can see you are already answering the other questions. Thank you so much. The second question is about, do you work in a public or private sector? Thank you so much for answering that, as well as the first question, which sector do you work in? And please, Tonya, just let me know if you're able to share it so that I can share back my screen.
Apologies. Can you see it?
No, we can see the presentation only.
I'm afraid it can't be shown unless it's closed then. So we have to move on and then we can show the results in total.
That's okay then. Then that's okay. I will share my screen back. Okay. So I will go quickly through the questions. You already are answering those questions. What is the type of your organization? Do you currently work on the development or operation of a blockchain use case? Yes or no? If so, does it relate indirectly or directly to climate action and sustainability or sustainability? The next question is, does your project relate to climate mitigation, which is avoiding or reducing CO2 emissions? Thank you so much for answering that as well. The other question is, does your project relate to climate adaptation, which as opposed to mitigation is it's about altering behaviors and systems to protect families, economies, and our environment where we live from the impacts of climate change? Thank you for answering those. Here we come to a question which Anka already spoke about, and that was also the reason why we organized this workshop. And it was initiated by the governmental advisory body of INATBA to learn more about the importance of blockchain use cases, blockchain projects, be it real use cases or projects that are in development or in hypothetical scenario. And we are looking to see 3 different types of blockchain projects. The first one is what is an example of a project, or at least an area in which it is nice to use blockchain, but it doesn't provide much improvement to the situation the project addresses. In this at this point, you can use the chat function. You can also ask to or raise your hand to answer, and speak about your own project, or suggest a project that you know of, or suggest a hypothetical project that you think would fall into this scenario. And as was mentioned at the beginning, this will be part of a report, and also the governmental advisory body is compiling a report on those use cases where blockchain is nice to have, but it doesn't provide much improvement to the situation. And we will follow with other questions as well. So please use the chat function, or you can raise your hand. This is an open question for discussion. I will give it a little more time because I know it might need a little bit thinking, but we would really appreciate if you could speak about your projects or suggest what do you think. Mohammed? Mohammed, do you want to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I would like to elaborate a bit about my project, which I'm working. My name is Mohammad Irfan Khalid, and I am first-year student doing PhD in Information Engineering Department at University of Salerno. And my research is basically on the 2 sides with respect to blockchain. The first part is to study about the implications of blockchain technology for healthcare sector broadly in general, but in specific, I'm more concerned to look for the potential issues with respect to patient data empowerment. And secondly, what are the scalability issues in terms of blockchain consensus mechanisms? So this is my broad, you can say, research area. And I must say blockchain has numerous features where we can use this technology unless we are more focused towards permission feature of blockchain. Like, for instance, I would like to add a few words about Algorand, which is a famous permissionless blockchain, and where we are basically discussing about proof of stake and those kind of stuff. So the entire focus of my project is to work for the security and privacy of features for blockchain technology, as well as the use case which I am studying, patient data, and how it it is going to be shared with other entities like researchers, like hospitals, and any other EU membership country, etc.
And in what way does this relate to sustainability or climate action? Is there any connection to those two, or not?
Generally speaking, it seems there is no connection with climate change, but if we see about the SDGs, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, it is falling towards the patient's data empowerment, and data subjects should have to have their own data, their own rights with them. So generally we can conclude that yes, up to some extent this is falling under that umbrella, but not that specifically that we can say that okay, we are working for the climate change like CO2 emission, etc.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You know, when it comes to the differentiation of the importance of such a use case, would you actually say that blockchain in this particular case is, so you would say that it's actually nice to have the technology as part of this project, but the project is actually able to function very well without that technology? Or would you say the technology actually is making it, provides it more impact, more significant impact?
To be very honest, there are two sides of this question. Like if I'm going to answer this, there are pros, there are cons. If you are having technology, you must be ready to face some consequences in terms of security and privacy issues. If you are not going to adopt technology, then obviously there are some limitations with respect to data generation, data management, like big data analytics, etc. So there are two perspectives. If you want to use technology, then you must be aware about the pros and cons of this technology. And secondly, if you want to do this project without technology, for instance, I should explain with an example. If you are going to have still centralized server for your data storage systems, in spite when the world is moving towards blockchain and those kind of stuff, it means that okay, you are very much fine that you have, as a public person, like as a residents of Italy, I can say that okay, I have trust in government, and I'm very much okay to share my data with with post office and with anyone else, and I don't have any kind of reservations. But with the passage of time, when data is becoming an oil for each and every industry, this basically produce different you can say alarming conditions for this person. So we must be aware about these pros and cons, and obviously there are some issues with the adoption of technology, and there are some good points. But being a researcher, I must say, if anyone wants or not, but ultimately we have to shift towards this paradigm.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing
You're welcome.
Use case. Anyone else has any use case or type of project or any other comment on type of project that would fall into this category? And you can raise your hand to speak. Okay, so we have no more feedback on this question. We will follow with another question, which is, in your opinion, what is an example of a project, or at least an area, in which the use of blockchain significantly improves the project, especially in terms of cost and effectivity, but the project is still doable with the absence of blockchain? Again, I will also leave a little more time for this question. Mohammed?
I'm really sorry for speaking a lot. I'm waiting that someone will obviously discuss or share his or her views. Actually, I have a simple example. In hospitals, we are basically getting consent and managing consent, and then using that data of the patients with or without consent. Blockchain says that you have to basically put all those records, maybe on chain or off chain, and there would be you can say 2 or 3 logins for different actors like data subject, data controller, and data requester for a research purpose or for any other purpose. So if you use blockchain, then obviously you are going to have all those features which blockchain offers, like transparency, immutability, and scalability, and all those stuff. And for instance, if you are not engaging blockchain, still you are doing that. You can do that using e-consent systems, or maybe with paper-based consent. And in paper-based, you are not going to have as such cost. And the point again comes that the patient is totally relying on government, and he or she trusts the government for his data or her data usage.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for providing that example. Also, thank you, Michelangelo, for providing your reply on the sustainable finance sector and the green bond issuance. Anyone else has any other example of a project? Okay, if there's no other suggestion, we can come to the third point. Third type of use case, in your opinion, what is an example of a project, or at least an area in which you cannot achieve the same result without blockchain?
So, Bara?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I have quite an interesting example where I think it's challenging, at least challenging. I mean, to do it, yeah. I mean, potentially you can, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense. If you talk about carbonization, carbon information exchange systems, where you have multiple platform and ecosystems, where you have to trust each other's, that your supply chain is doing the right things, and you never have one provider only with one system. So this makes you can easily use a blockchain for get this trust into the system, because if the systems are trusting each other and the data comes from a trusted system, then more or less you have a community of trustees, and then you can accept and agree in an interoperable system between the different parties that the data is in the same quality and the same certification and the same aspect gathered over the supply chain in the steps before, even if it's coming from another chain. So the chain of chain here needs to be certified and validated in blockchain. I think that's nearly impossible to do without a blockchain. At least it's a lot more complex, specifically if you're thinking about what you can do with smart contracts in the way of how easily you can adapt and change the system in agreement with all parties in the future. And we all know, if you have multiple systems and platform and ecosystems connected, it's heavily complex to change them if they are running. Yeah? And I think that's one of the biggest advantages what you can do here too. Yeah.
Thank you, Jörg. I also think it's very important what Anka mentioned. Any projects that relate to survival of species, be it the humans or animals, plants, and so on, is something where we need to use technology that can actually accelerate those protective measures.
Yeah, I think Sorry, me again.
No problem.
We also did, I did it with a startup here in the healthcare area also, quite an interesting project in the same direction, also gathering information from cancer-related persons. But at the end, I think it works quite well. To technology, we reached a really interesting level, but then the governments are coming and cancel the project because of DSGVO, they don't want to store personal and even fully anonymized data in the system. So I think sometimes even the governments need to think about what makes sense or not. Specifically, if you're securing that no relation to persons can be made and no information can be stolen and no personality attributes are whatever linked to any person. I think often you have governmental rules and regulations who stops us in doing things in the right way. We could do it because of legal restrictions.
Very good point. And then it comes the moral question: is it better to give more power to institutions or public sector in exchange for better health or better healthcare and so on? So that's something to consider as well. But thank you, Jörg.
Yeah, I think there are technologies out who can help you with your knowledge proof and others, that the trusted data is in the system without really, and we should open our mindset a little bit here. If you want to move forward and use the advantages of technology, we have to also think about legal and governmental regulation and rules.
Thank you. Anyone else has any suggestions or comments? Please raise your hands or write in the chat. And Christina?
There, can you hear me now?
Yes, Christina, yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, I would say, I mean, blockchain is not a necessity from my perspective. In some instances, it can help. And in some instances, I think it will maybe just create a more of a controlling function over people. And I don't like it when it's been used, well, I should say, if it's gonna be used in that capacity, but for tracking carbon reductions and things like that, I could see, and also maybe for helping supply chains with sustainability projects and things like that, then it could be helpful. So both yes and no, I would say.
Thank you so much. We have also a remark in the chat from Chatnaya Sundaram. I think an solution can be built without blockchain per se. The advantage that blockchain brings is the creation of a network. Once the network is created, different solutions, decentralized apps, could be built on top of this network. Different stakeholders might have different requirements, hence different solutions can be built tailored to these requirements. The cost of building these solutions will be significantly reduced once the network is already set up. The whole network can leverage the single source of truth solutions once the network is built, which will ultimately increase the efficiency of the processes. Thoughts? I absolutely agree with you.
Sarah, if I may bring up a project that I think is really interesting, and I genuinely don't think it would achieve the same result without blockchain, and this is a project that I was introduced to by somebody that I know and works in the ecosystem in Latin America, which is the owner of a gold mine who has decided that what he would like to do, I mean, it's a consortium of owners, instead of actually digging up and extracting the gold, is to use the sort of established tools for auditing and estimating the reserve of gold that is present in the mine, and issue against that reserve that is effectively in the ground gold-backed tokens, right? There is a market already for tokens as well as futures for gold that are sort of traded on blockchain. But what this project does is, one, tokenization of the reserve, right? So it is a backed token by a very physical reserve. It integrates satellite data and AI to permanently sort of, I don't remember the cadence of it, post pictures as NFTs on the chain to certify that the land hasn't been touched, so the reserve hasn't been taken down. It also involves the local community to do sort of very physical audits that things have of the surrounding area, so things haven't happened, it hasn't been dug up. And part of the earnings of from transacting the gold-backed tokens are coming back to the community, one, to pay for the actual evaluation that, you know, the land hasn't been touched, but also to make up for potential jobs that have been lost in the community due to the fact that the mine hasn't opened up. Now, obviously, there's a question earlier, it's like, how do you evaluate this token compared to the price of physical gold? And I think there is, yes, you discount it because in case you want to redeem it, it has to be dug up. But at the same time, one of the biggest costs that people who hold gold, right, because most people hold it, or most institutions hold it, they don't transact it, is the cost of physical custody of the physical gold and the audits that need to be paid on, I think it's quarterly or monthly basis, depending on the custodian. And so, again, there isn't yet a framework for pricing this exactly, but it's one of those things that we don't eat gold. We store it. We dig it up and we store it. We might as well store it the natural way where it originally went without disturbing the ecosystem, if we are able to use technology to evaluate how much is there and then back the issuance of a token with that. And so this is one of those cases that honestly I would have never thought about. I don't know that in the absence of satellite data, of AI, of blockchain, would be feasible. I think it remains to see how feasible it is as it is right now. But it's one of those that gives you an idea of potential beyond the things that one would have thought possible or could easily imagine. My imagination would not have gotten me that far.
Thank you so much, Enka, for that use case and the type of project. It's definitely something worth exploring. I'm just looking at the chat, and we also have a question as a potential, another suggestion from Fernando Escobar. What about the European blockchain services infrastructure? What role could a shared infrastructure at a European level play as a vector or booster of blockchain initiatives that contribute to the SDGs? Very interesting question, Fernando. Do you have an answer to that? Or anyone else that would like to answer that question on actually leveraging a network or a shared infrastructure in favor of the SDGs? And you can raise your hands if you want to speak. If we have no reply, it's also okay. We will include it in our final summary as a potential, suggestion to be explored. We also have a suggestion from Michelangelo Cristoforetti. Another area is the physical asset level tracking in terms of primary GHG data and emissions of course, in compliance with GDPR, technically possible integrating IoT sensor data or satellite data, like in the example of mining. Thank you for sharing that example as well. I suggest we abandon this question, but feel free to write any more suggestions if you come up with them. I would like to continue with the poll questions. Some of you have already answered the other questions. We have a few more open questions. In your experience, what are the areas of focus for organizations using blockchain to help the environment? And this question is more about what would organizations mostly go for, in which area, for what sector, to use blockchain to help the environment. Again, you can write it in the chat, or you can raise your hand to speak and suggest what you think from your own experience with projects. Thank you, Anka. Just waiting. Christina.
Yeah, sorry, now I'm talking again.
No problem.
Well, I'm involved in a project where we both work with renewable energy and also regenerative farming. And in terms of the regenerative farming, there it's more how you can track and trace carbon offsets, so you could sell that. So from my perspective, at least from what I've seen, it's primarily different kinds of carbon credits or offsets or things like that the blockchain could be used for track and tracing, but no specific that would in itself affect, more like keep track of things that are going on. So I would say it's more like one of other tools that could be used for, creating more sustainable solutions.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion. Anyone else has any other suggestions or experience that they would like to share? If not, we will go to another question, which is part of the poll question. In your opinion, is it primarily the responsibility of the private sector or the public sector to provide solutions to fight climate change, or solutions that are sustainable? And we have all the answers there. There's another question we wanted to ask you. In your opinion, what more can we do to educate the global population about how new technologies can fight climate action and enhance sustainability in general? And again, from your experience, what do you think is lacking in terms of raising the awareness, educating the population more about these topics, and kind of letting them know what is possible also for individuals, not only businesses? Is there something that can be done more? Christina?
Yes, I mean, I have been thinking a lot about these things when it comes to sustainability and climate change and all of that. And I actually think it seems and it does on the corporations. I never hear anyone talking about weather modification technologies and things like that, how that could affect the climate, or the big corporations usually get, tax subsidies to have computer centers and all of that. So I think actually that most people are aware and they want to make good choices, but you know, what choices they're able to make is determined by the businesses. So I think it's the wrong way to say that we should, you know, educate the everyday citizen, because I think all everyday citizens are really aware of, you know, nature and preserving that and take care of that, but they have limited power. So I think the focus should be on how can we, you know, make corporations make more sustainable products, I would say.
Thank you.
Can I jump in and make a slightly inflammatory comment?
Okay.
I don't know. I think it's easy to forget living in an environment or to some extent a bubble of people who care about climate, who educate themselves about climate, to forget that not everyone has the same perspective. I think definitely the conversation in Europe, and look, I'm Romanian, but I live in the US now. There is a big difference between the maturity of conversation in Europe around climate and what we see in certain parts of the US, outside the big metropolitan areas where people tend to be a bit more educated and concerned about this. But it's also, and I think I'll go back to the example of the DRC, so the Democratic Republic of Congo's government opening up for extraction vast areas of the Congo Basin, right? And they have made it very clear that, and we can have conversation about transparency of government and how governments may or may not be more corrupt than others, but that aside, they've made it very clear that for them, they needed the revenue to start being able to deal with some of the fall of civil conflict, pandemic, great inflation, and decline in economic activity in the country, and being able to ensure some type of basic social safety net for the population. I think it is very hard to care about the environment if you're not, and we see it in the Amazon with people, sort of communities taking down parts of the forests to raise cattle, because cattle brings revenue and they're able to feed their families. And so I think it can be easy to overstate priorities of climate for different demographics. And this is where finding the ability to stop referring to climate protection as an externality, as something that needs to be done on top, and finding the right way to introduce it in the normal economic discourse, for me, and this is where sort of regenerative finance I go back to is important. And again, I say this from perspective of having worked in sort of developing countries for a little over a decade.
Christina, did you want to follow up? Christina?
Sorry, I had muted myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and say that, yes, you know, financial equality is really important, because if you're starving, you don't have the time to think about the environment. But that also comes back to government, I guess, and big corporations and all of that. And of course, there's a bigger awareness in the Western world, and also differentiated awareness within the Western world as well. But there are so many things that we could focus on, because now it seems we're focusing mostly on, you know, average people, how they should change their lives in the Western world. But I don't hear anyone addressing the wars that are going on. You know, that's big pollutants. I don't hear anyone addressing that, or if we're going to take, current events, the Nord Stream pipelines that let out methane gas that is probably like 10 billion cow farts that they let out in an hour. But I don't hear anyone talking about things like that. So I think we need to like raise the bar in these discussions and not only look at the little guy. It needs to
well, in things that happen
more things like that.
Yeah, I think both of those cases, kind of when they happen sort of out of a sudden, you have to be in a emergency scenario, and in that aspect it might be also difficult to think about the environment when your life is in danger and so on. So, but you are raising a very good point. Okay, any other questions? Sorry, any other comments about this particular question? I'm aware that we are running a little bit out of time. So I have one more question here before we answer the questions in the Q&A. In your opinion, should sustainability be a mandatory goal in businesses in the future? And anyone from the participants can, say their opinion or raise their hand. And I see no raised hands or anybody else commenting on this particular question. Okay, thank you, Christina. Okay, so sorry, I have one more question actually in my slides. Is there an area in climate action or sustainability or the sustainable development goals where you think decentralization actually isn't a good option? Anything that comes to your mind?
I'm going to quickly jump in here. And I don't know whether it's decentralization is good here or not. I have a big question mark around standards. And how, and I think it was mentioned before, there's so many certification and standard setting companies and solutions in the ESG space now, that it can be hard to understand what kind of standards are you. I think it really impedes growth because folks who are building projects can't necessarily scale because there isn't a clear standard setting body that, or a standard that they follow. And then companies as well, if they're looking to invest in this, is not necessarily clear for them whether this complies with the level of requirements that their national or regional government has. I also have arguments against having just one body that controls everything. And I think we've seen it with sometimes in financial markets. But it's a big question mark for me.
Very good point. Thank you, Anka. We also have Michelangelo Cristoforetti mentioning a similar thing. Most probably it will be hard to be tracked without a well-defined sustainability standard, in particular on climate. ESGs and SDGs will have to be followed, and organizations need to integrate them in their day-to-day activities. This will probably be integrated with a request for certification. To comment from you both, Antonia. Any other comments? for this question.